iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hello and welcome back to the iHeart Podcast Speaker Series. I'm Will Pearson, president of iHeart Podcasts. Great to be with you again. We've got a special conversation today. I know we're usually talking to one of our favorite podcasters. Today, we're actually talking to a member of our Ruby Studios team to talk a little bit about the world of custom podcasts. It's been super interesting watching over the past, I'd say 4 or 5 years as the podcast space has evolved from a space truly driven by direct response advertisers, and they're still a really important part of the industry, to brands waking up to the effectiveness of podcast advertising and seeing what the direct response advertisers were seeing. And then as they dip their toe in the water, moving into the space of custom podcasts and custom integrations and opportunities, other ways to activate the audience that they're trying to activate. And so to talk about this today and to learn a little bit about what we can be thinking about in the world of custom podcasts, I've got Rachael Swan-Krasnoff, one of the leaders of our Ruby Studios team. We're going to talk a lot about Ruby. Rachael, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, it is an exciting time to be in this space. You guys have gotten
Absolutely
a ton of recognition at Ruby. And I guess I didn't talk a whole lot about it at the top here. So actually, I will toss to you first to just tell us a little bit about what Ruby Studios is. You're part of our podcast team here, but with a very specific focus on this world of custom podcasts. Tell us about Ruby.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ruby is the branded audio team here at iHeart. Everything we do ladders up to the master brand. So you get all of the benefits of working with iHeart. So the scale, the great names, all those things, but also you're working with a team who specifically understands what's important to our partners, our brands, and not only podcast listeners. So we work day in and day out to really create engaging programs with our partners, but we understand things like KPIs, legal, reporting, all the things that make it a lot easier for our partners to create something really exciting. And yeah, we like to say that we're building more than custom podcasts. We're building really comprehensive audio campaigns. So we'll work with our partners to come up with a custom podcast, but that's just the content driver itself, and that we can really expand that to really meet listeners where they are across the audio realm. So it's a really exciting time.
It's been really fun to watch over the last couple of years, especially as the Ruby team has grown to meet that demand for custom podcasts. But if you're a brand, what should you be thinking about if you're interested in testing out the world of custom podcasts? What should you be asking yourself first?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think that it's gonna sound very simple, but the main thing is, what do you as a brand want to accomplish with your custom podcast? Because so my role on the team is that I really help brands come up with these concepts. So in Ruby, we have everyone from dedicated pre-sale to producers to people helping really create those campaigns all the way through. So when we start to come up with those ideas, it's really important for us to understand the basics. So why do you want to create a custom podcast? What are you looking to accomplish? What impact do you want to have? Do you want to set yourself up as a leader in the space? Do you want to maybe tackle a specific problem? What's most important? On top of that, who are you as a brand speaking to? Who's your target audience? Is it the target for all of your other campaigns, for everything that you're doing, or are we reaching somebody new? These things are really important because they help us really craft those stories. So know your target audience, who's your primary, who's your secondary, who's your tertiary, and then we're going to make that content for your primary and secondary. On top of that, like more fun stuff like the creative, like what tone are you trying to take with this podcast? Is it something really fun, lighthearted, funny, if you will? Or is it going to be a little more serious? Are we going more into that thought leader space? All of those things combined really help set us up for success when we're coming up with those ideas. We always tell our partners, the more info you can give us, the better. We have a really handy creative questionnaire that any seller watching this call is going to be like, oh, there's the mention, there's the first one, because it's really the most important part for us is, again, to just know as much as we can about our partners to really build something in the space that we understand the most, that really speaks to their messaging and who they want to reach. So the more info, the better.
And it's fun to see that in action, seeing the range of brands that you guys have worked with when you think about anything from an Under Armour to a T-Mobile to a Trojan to an IBM, like obviously incredibly different brands, which I guess leads me to the question about, measuring success, how we define success in the custom space. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you guys think about it, and then also how some of the brands have thought about it that you work with?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So everyone really like success is different for all of our partners because all of our partnerships are truly bespoke. Before we were Ruby, we were the custom podcast team. So everything is really truly custom. We see the most success with upper funnel. So like brand awareness, brand shift in perception, things like that. However, there is definitely a growing space for more DR things like actually driving sales, things of that nature. We're starting to really understand that more and where it makes sense. So we can really build multifaceted campaigns. So if you think about it, like the podcast content itself can talk to overarching stories, telling deeper stories with listeners, because really the beauty of a custom podcast is that you get to spend just an uninterrupted time with your listeners. They get to engage more deeply with your brand than they can in other mediums. But at the same time, within that narrative, you own all of the ad spots within the podcast and also surrounding it. So you get to get harder hitting messaging across, or DR, CTAs, things like that. So again, multifaceted. When we look at success, we always like to stress to our partners that they're not buying downloads. We actually have a really unique business model where clients are paying $0 for production, $0 for talent costs, and all of their investment goes towards a hardworking media plan. So what we stress is that the time that you actually spend with listeners is the most valuable. So look at things like time spent, completion rate, things like that, because again, it's just building a connection and a community with your audience. We've had brands look at different things. Like I said, we're really understanding where we can do more lower funnel. We've actually had a partnership with Mattress Firm. The podcast was Chasing Sleep. It's probably one of my favorites. We examined just ways that like people with like really weird sleep schedules, like it would be astronauts or people who lived in like areas where it was dark for days on end. Like, how did they adjust and what did that mean? But the podcast actually drove a 4-time return on the return on ad spend and a 45% lift in incremental sales, which is incredible. And because we know that now, we're able to kind of bring that into our new podcast, which is really exciting. So that wasn't even a metric that they originally went out to plan, but it worked around it. So again, it just totally varies based on our client. But the beauty of working with Ruby, that it really is a partnership from start to finish. So we're going to have a lot of conversations about our partners' KPIs and understand them so that we can we can work together to find measurement in a way that proves that out for us so that they see the success that they're looking for. And of course, we're also going to be honest with our partners. We're going to say, look, if this is the story that we're going to tell, this is where we think you're going to see the most success, because we really always look for that renewal. We always want to make sure that we're creating successful partnerships. And we've actually seen over a 91% renewal rate from season 1 to season 2. And that's because we're taking all of this into account. So that's a really long-winded to say that success totally varies by partners, but we'll work together to find out what works best for you.
But that stat, I mean, I don't know that there's a better stat in terms of a takeaway and, you know, what brands have seen with effectiveness, that 91% renewal rate for brands going from a season 1 to a season 2 is unbelievable. So whatever those KPIs are, I think part of what makes this work so well too, you mentioned the team and the different roles that people play, but we really did want to build a team that found this perfect meeting spot of, you know, giving brands what they're looking for while also making sure to give listeners and audiences what they're looking for. And when you can find that intersection of podcasts that, of course, they have the brand messaging, and of course, they're trying to help the brands achieve those KPIs, but also with the team saying, yeah, let's make sure we're really building something that will stick with the audience. The shows are just fantastic. And I think that's why we see those kinds of rates. But maybe let's talk about the audiences for a second. You know, you're tasked with finding different audiences. Again, we mentioned some of those examples before when we think about something from, you know, Trojan to IBM to some of the others. You know, they're obviously very different audiences. I don't think, last I checked, they're going after the exact same audiences between those two brands. But how do you guys think about audiences that you're trying to reach and go after them?
Yeah, for sure. I think like we said before, like that's part of like our initial questions is like, who are you trying to reach? Because that really does determine the type of show that we're going to produce. And I think what we've learned, especially recently, is that brands are starting to shift to be more and more specialized when it comes to those audiences. We've gone from like really broad plays. Like our team did the Game of Thrones House of the Dragon companion series, which was really exciting. And obviously that's a broad audience that has a ton of mass appeal, including myself. I was very excited about this one. But we've also done in the pharma space stuff that's like much more niche, much more specific. And it's really just about, again, like highlighting those stories, but then really finding ways to get in there so it just feels so much more personal. So I think two really great examples of that are the Head Start, Embracing the Journey, which was a podcast that we really created to build a community for those suffering or living with chronic migraine, because you can feel really isolated when you have these types of conditions. I believe it's something more than 15 days a month when you have chronic migraines, you're just kind of debilitated from them. So really raising up those voices and helping people reach that community. We also did the same with, it's called Untold Stories, Life with Myasthenia Gravis. And again, sharing these stories were a priority for our client. It wasn't a mass play. It was really finding those affected and really kind of bringing them together. And we're able to do that by just finding these voices who are eager to share these stories. Our production team does amazing jobs of finding these real people who want to tell these stories. So whether that's through social or blogs or going to communities or organizations that work in these space and bringing them out to really share those stories. And then also, again, working with iHeart, you have the really great advantage of working with the #1 podcast network. So like I mentioned, like our custom podcasts are built with a media plan that's specifically created to target the audiences that are most important. So we have the added benefit of running tune-in spots, brand messaging across the top shows on every category, every vertical. So no matter your audience, we're able to reach them, and they're already super fans of podcasting. So we're finding them when they're already eager for more shows. So I think it's a really great mix of just like knowing how to create that sticky content that people really want to listen to, but also on top of it, having that plan to really get those listeners, because we're creating content that we're all going to be proud of. So we want people to hear it and be excited for more of it too.
Well, to your point, you know, the strategy around reaching these audiences isn't really all that different between the custom podcast and every other podcast we launch.
Exactly.
We know that we're able to reach, as people often hear, 9 out of 10 Americans. And so we can find those subsets that people are trying to go after and make sure that we're reaching those, which has been really, really cool to see. Before I ask you about any other favorites from Ruby, I want to talk to you about grown-up stuff. This was a really cool concept that the team came up with, and it's been fun to see it in action. But tell us a little bit about grown-up stuff.
Yeah, so Grown Up Stuff is really a first of its kind show for our team. Typically, we're producing podcasts in partnership with brands. So entire series dedicated to a specific brand and the stories that they want to tell. Grown Up Stuff is a really great example of how our team is working to be more of a partner for sales, but also for brands in general. So really offering a solution that's maybe a little bit less of a barrier for entry for some brands when it comes to budgets, but it's really just the entire show was created for brands in a really brand safe environment. So the whole show is really about just like discovering those parts of adulthood that we all are pretty unsure of. I'm speaking from experience, or also rather like a lack of experience here. Like anything you're wondering about, like folding sheets, how do you pay for college, things like that. And it really, every episode, our hosts, Matt and Molly, who are actually part of Ruby, talk to subject matter experts to really understand all of those things and kind of just demystify those elements. But it's all created so that brands can come in and really own episodes. So whether that's through alignment on themes or actually coming in and like talking specifically about what the brand does, it's an entire show that's really built for that. So it's super exciting. They actually just released their first branded episodes in partnership with TIAA, where they talk about how you afford college and things like that. So just really exciting opportunity. And I think when we talk about grown-up stuff, like I said, it's just a great example of how we're trying to, as Ruby, as we evolve, just be there more for brands at every step of their entry into the custom podcast space or the custom space. And really just like, yeah, it's just very exciting. And we're looking forward to working more with brands. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So for anybody watching, if there's a brand that is interested in exploring the space, tell us how you guys and they can get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free to reach out to your sellers, your partners at iHeart, and they'll loop us in and we can give you more info on the show itself. We can also talk about your goals, what you're looking to accomplish, and how we can really build that into a story of an episode. What's great about Gus, it's probably the most brand friendly show because it really is like just whatever you guys want to do, we'll find a way to get those stories out there. And Matt and Molly, like I said, they're hosts, they're part of Ruby, so they really understand making great content, but also how to do that with brands first. So yeah, it's a really great opportunity that we're all excited about.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, congrats on everything that the Ruby team has built and continues to build, and the accolades and recognition that the team has gotten for all of these great shows. It's going to be fun watching over the course of the next couple of years, because I think just as we're seeing more and more brands are raising their hands, they're seeing success in the podcast space with their existing ad plans and thinking, I think there's an opportunity to take this a step further. So again, Rachael, thanks so much for spending some time with us. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks so much.
And thanks everybody for watching and listening today. We'll be back with you next week.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.